Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the webinar for the Medical School Application Fee Waiver Program. Throughout this first presentation, we are going to be telling you a little bit about what this program is, who we are, and also this is a series of several webinars. We'll be hosting 3 over the course of the summer, so you can just keep your eyes open for that. But to start with introductions, we are a team of 8 members. Only 2 of us are here today, which is myself, Claudine. I am a second year going into third year medical student at the University of Ottawa, and I've been with Price of a Dream for just over a year and a half, I think. And I will let Chantal present herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chantal. I'm a third year med student at U of T, and I've been with Quad since I started medical school in 2018. So it's been a great journey and a really good experience to be able to support with some of the programs that we have, like this one.
Thanks, Chantal. And just to tell you about what Price of a Dream actually is, so we're basically a team of medical trainees, staff, as well as residents who have been working on this project, which essentially our goal is to reduce the financial barriers for having access to medical school applications. And we've been working in part on the application fee waiver program, which is what we're talking about today. But we've also assisted the MCAT fee assistance program. So we've just all been working together to make that happen. In terms of the application fee waiver program, which we're talking about today, this is the second year that we are going to be running it. Last year was the first year that it ran, and it was a pilot program. And this year we're running it again for the upcoming cycle. So why do we believe that this work is important? So the first piece is that there is still a lack of medical student body diversity, and there has been a lot of focus over the last years to increase that diversity and to target less represented populations, such as the BIPOC population, LGBTQ+, as well as the lower socioeconomical background in medical school. Now, when we talk about low SES, we're looking a lot at the financial barriers that we're looking at. And if some of you are already preparing to apply to medical school, you've probably noticed that the MCAT is expensive. The preparation material for MCAT is expensive. You also have the CASPER that is an additional fee now. And you also have the application fee itself, which can be several hundreds of dollars, depending on how many universities you're applying to. So being able to address these financial barriers to make medical school more accessible to people who might not have the financial resources is very important to us, and probably for the people involved as well. So we would like to introduce you the Medical School Application Fee Waiver Program, which is one of the programs that we've put into place, and like I mentioned before, that ran for the first time last year. And what this program does is that it essentially waives the medical school application cost for any applicant that is eligible. It was developed by our team. We call ourselves Price of a Dream, or POD, and it has been in collaboration with the AFMC, as well as Ontario universities and other stakeholders as well. Now, this year, something that we've changed compared to last year is that we've actually expanded to other provinces. So in the beginning, so last year, it was only available in Ontario, but this year we've also worked with Saskatchewan as well as the University of Alberta so that we can expand this program and make it available across on a national level. In terms of general requirements, in terms of what actually makes you eligible for this program, it's quite straightforward. The first requirement is that you need to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. You also need to have a proof of finances, which we use the notice of assessment for that. If you are under the age of 25, You also require the notice of assessment of your parents, as well as an estimate of your annual living expenses, any other supporting document related to finances, as well as a personal statement. So these are essentially all the things that you find in the application for what the requirements is. There are also additional requirements based on the province, specifically for Saskatchewan, as well as the University of Alberta, but we'll be talking about this later during the presentation.
Sweet. And we can transition into talking a bit more about the individual programs, starting with the Ontario programs. As Claudine mentioned, this is the second year that the Ontario program will be running. And when we say Ontario program, what we mean is you can be from anywhere in the country and choose to apply to this program, but the specific schools or medical schools that you're applying to have the fees waived from are at least one of the 6 Ontario medical schools. So when we say Ontario program, when we say University of Alberta program, it's specifying to which medical school you hope to have your fees waived from. Something about the Ontario program that is unique is because there's 6 medical schools in Ontario. When you apply to this program, you are getting access to a number of benefits if you are eligible and you are awarded the waiver. So the first thing is when you apply to medical school, there's a $220 fee to have your application processed. So that's the first thing that would be waived if you receive this award. The second thing is because there's 6 medical schools, on average, the most people apply to 3 out of the 6. And so this award would provide you with the ability to apply to up to 3 of the 6 for free. And that means each of those schools have their own individual fees ranging from about $100 to $130 each. And that would also be waived for you. So the schools, the 6 schools are listed at the bottom of the slide on the left there. So if any of these are schools that you're interested in applying to in this upcoming cycle, then this would be a program that, of course, you should be interested in. And it took a lot of collaboration across different stakeholders to make it happen, which are also listed on the slide there. The application period, it already starting in June 28th, and it's up until August 23rd. We highly recommend that you apply sooner than later. It doesn't change the outcome of your application. But what it does do is if you recognize that you're missing components, it gives you the time to get those components together. Some of the things that Claudine mentioned, the general requirements, are things that if you don't have them, like your income taxes, they can take quite a bit of time to get. So we recommend that you start sooner than later. And this year, the medical school applications for Ontario are due in October. So if you do receive the award, then you should apply that award by the medical school application deadline. So if you don't submit your applications on time, of course, you unfortunately cannot use your waiver if you're provided it. And even though Amira and Toby couldn't make it today, here are their lovely faces, and they're doing a lot of great promotion work for us. Next slide. So for the University of Alberta program, an important feature is that when people hear Alberta, they wonder about Calgary, because there are the 2 universities or medical schools there. Specifically, this program is for the University of Alberta. And we've closely collaborated with the admissions office at the University of Alberta to make that program possible for this year. And there's a $180 application fee in order to apply to the medical school. So if you receive this award, that's the benefit. And Lulu, her face is on the side as well. She's been one of the reps to support with outreach for this program. And we're really excited to have her on the team. So this program is a bit different from the Ontario program because there are specific equity-based exceptions or preferences that are granted because there's a smaller number of vouchers available for this program. So the priority is given to residents of Alberta, but also residents of Yukon, Nunavut, or Northwest Territories, in addition to Indigenous applicants from anywhere in the country. So if you fit into one of these 2 criteria, we highly recommend that you apply if you want to actually attend the University of Alberta's medical school. But if you don't fall into one of these 2 groups, then we would say that there's a low chance that you'll be awarded the award this year. That might change in the future if the program continues, but we want to make sure that those who are getting access to the awards are the ones who are often underrepresented in some of these groups. So it's important for you to recognize that, especially as you're spending time applying to the program. And in terms of the application period, it ends a bit earlier than the Ontario program, so in August 2nd. So it means that if you're interested in applying and you fit into one of these two groups or both of them, then you should apply as soon as you can. And their application deadline for their medical school applications is October 1st. So similarly, you will need to actually apply to their medical school before this deadline in order to take full advantage of your award. And in terms of what it looks like for you to actually submit or to prove that you fit into one of those two groups, we can talk about that a little bit later at the end. But there's a couple steps on the application that you'll need to do in order to prove that you fall into one of those two groups or both of those groups. And then the third and final program for this year is in Saskatchewan. And we work closely with the admissions office in Saskatchewan to make this program possible, and that includes partnering with Apoorv, one of the medical students at the University of Saskatchewan. For this program, there's two fees that you would face if you apply to the Saskatchewan program and if you get an interview. So the first is the $150 application fee. So that's waived if you successfully get the award. But then if you're offered an interview to their medical school, there's a $75 fee associated with that. So that would also be waived for you if you get the fee waiver and you also get an interview. So you take full benefit of both of those things. And similar to the program just mentioned in the University of Alberta, there is a preference that's granted to specific groups of people for equity-based purposes. So if you're Indigenous and from anywhere in the country, that would be you're definitely a group that we want to make space for in this application. And the second is you don't have to necessarily be a resident in Saskatchewan, Yukon, Nunavut, or Northwest Territories, but you do have to be enrolled in their post-secondary institution for a minimum of 3 years in those places. So if your family's in Ontario, but you've been attending the University of Saskatchewan for the last 3 years, you're a person who there'd be preference granted to for this application. And so similarly, if you fall into one of these groups, we recommend that you apply. But if you don't fall into one of these two groups or both of these groups, then there's a lower chance that you'll get the award, especially in this first year of the program. The application fee waiver program period is the same as it is for Ontario. So it closes on August 23rd, so a bit more time as well. But once again, try not to put it off to the last minute because you don't want to, unfortunately, not get the application in on time. And their applications for their medical school should also be closing October 1st. So you get the benefit of the award by submitting your medical school application on time. That's when it's waived. And so you need to make sure that you're aware of the fee waiver program application deadline, but that you're also aware of the medical school application deadline.
Perfect. So how do you actually get started with your application? So the first step before getting into anything is to file your taxes, because in order to be eligible for applying to the program, you will need to have your notice of assessment. So if you have not filled your taxes yet, we highly encourage you to do so as soon as possible. It usually takes a few weeks for it to be processed, so it's not too late, but make sure that you get that done as soon as possible if it hasn't been done. And similarly, if you are under the age of 25 and you will need the notice of assessment of your parents, also make sure that they have completed their taxes. But in terms of the application itself, the first thing you will have to do is to visit the AFMC website, which is where the application portal is. And on that website, there you will be able to do two things. The first thing is to assess your eligibility. The instructions are written on the slide. So basically there should be a check eligibility and apply. And then after assessing your eligibility and seeing whether or not you are eligible, you will be able to then move on to the application itself. So one thing to note, if you are deemed eligible, is that there will be 3 separate forms for all 3 programs. So there will be one separate form for Ontario, one separate form for Saskatchewan, as well as one separate form for Alberta. You are allowed to apply to all 3 programs in the event where you suspect that you would be a candidate for the 3 provinces. So just keep that in mind. If you're an Saskatchewan resident and you also want to apply to Ontario, you can apply to both provinces, but make sure that you fill both of the forms. Here on the right side, it's just a screenshot of the eligibility page, essentially. So this is essentially what you can expect. And I think that Chantal has just linked the link into the chat. So feel free to click on it so that you're able to take a look. To summarize the timeline of the application, as mentioned, the application has already opened since about 2 weeks on June 28th. You can currently have access to it on the AFMC website. The University of Alberta has a slightly earlier closing date compared to the other 2. So if you are a resident of Alberta or you're planning to apply to Alberta, make sure that you take note of that so that you're not missing it. The deadline is on August 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Now, one thing to also note is that the dates that are written for the deadlines are in the time zones of the provinces themselves. So that can get confusing sometimes, so make sure you also pay attention to that detail. For Saskatchewan and Ontario, they do have a later deadline, which is on August 23rd at 11:59. And once again, that 11:59 would be 11:59 p.m. and it is in their respective time zones. Once the application period has closed, there is a period where the application will be reviewed. So that would be anytime basically between when the period closed as well as when we have the program closing date. Up until the date where then the participants who have been elected to be awarded the fee application waiver program, which is on September 7th. So on September 7th, anyone who has applied and who has been awarded will receive a notification saying that they have been accepted. People who have applied and were not awarded will still receive an email, but just telling them that it's a rejection. But everyone should be getting an email on September 7th. After that, you will have to use the directions that are communicated to you by email to be able to apply the award to your application on the actual medical school application portal. This process is going to be a little bit different for every province and every university based on the province, just because every province and university has a different application portal. For Ontario, it's all through OMSAS, but for Saskatchewan as well as for Alberta, it's a little bit different. So the process will be a little bit different, but all the instructions will be communicated to you once you get that response on September 7th.
Great. So we know that we've described quite a bit of requirements in order to apply to these programs, and even though they're clear on the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada website, the link that was put in the chat a bit earlier, there's a guide that's on that website to help walk you through the requirements, and I think they also have a checklist at the end of that guide. But we want to go through it one more time just so that you have it all in one place. Starting with some of the general requirements, like we said, whenever we use the term notice of assessment, we're talking about your income taxes, and you're able to use either 2020 or 2021. So if you haven't filed your income taxes for this year, but you have for the year before, then you can still use those previous income taxes. And the same can be said for your parents. If you're under the age of 25, then it's necessary for you to also submit information from their income taxes too. we recognize that some people have specific situations that can make them estranged from their parents, and in that case, we highly recommend that you reach out to the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada, and we'll give you the contact information for that shortly. But in most other cases, you would need to submit that information. And if you're married, you also need to provide that information for your spouse. So make sure that not only you, but your parents and your partner, if you're married, have that tax information together so you can apply on time. The other thing is, yes, income taxes are a helpful reflection of your financial state, but so are scholarships that you've received, specifically needs-based scholarships. So if they're merit-based alone, then that's not very helpful. The goal is to demonstrate that you have need and that other people have identified that need before and have granted you support in the context of that need. So that's where that comes in. And the same could be said for financial aid. If you're in Ontario, for example, and you've accessed OSAP, that would qualify, and you should understand or be aware of how much you've borrowed, and take screenshots of that by connecting to the National Loan Services. So this is different ways to prove in general that there's a financial need that this program would help you with. And then lastly, estimate of your annual expenses. This can be a bit harder to do, and it can be for people who maybe are not aware of what that looks like, it might take some time. So also just be aware of what those annual expenses look like, because another part of the application is to assess the difference between how much you're making or your income and your expenses. That's a really key part of the application that the AFMC takes into account when they're reflecting or reviewing your application. So make sure you have that information accurate as well. So now for more specific requirements at each of the schools. At the University of Alberta, the way that we know or will assess whether you're actually a resident of Alberta or of one of the territories in Canada is the address that's on your income tax statement. So that's going to be the way that we assess that. So if you are in Alberta now, but you haven't gotten your income taxes completed there, unfortunately, you wouldn't qualify from that perspective. You can try to reach out to the AFMC to explain the situation and provide proof of address otherwise, but this is how we're going to be assessing that for this year. The other thing is Indigenous ancestry. This is by self-declaration on the fee waiver application. So if you're applying for the award, then you pretty much check a box. But the University of Alberta, when you apply to their medical school, has another set of criteria and a process to review those documents. So you might on this application self-declare, but at some point, if you do actually apply to their medical school and you are reviewed as a potential applicant, you will need to provide that documentation eventually. It doesn't affect your receiving of this award, but it may affect how you're reflected on as a candidate for their medical school if you don't have those documents available. You would be transferred or switched to a general stream of applicants. In Saskatchewan, when we're talking about proof, once again, if you're attending a post-secondary institution for a minimum of 3 years in Saskatchewan or one of the territories in Canada, it's self-declaration, so you need to just check off a box or state that you have attended the school. But if you do need to provide those documents eventually, it's going to be through the medical school application process as well. So you might self-declare in this case on the fee waiver application and get the award, but you're expected to prove that for your medical school application to University of Saskatchewan. And if you are not able to provide the documents proving that you've attended a school in one of those 4 provinces or territories, then it's seen as a professionalism breach. So they take it very seriously. So when you're applying to the program to the end, you're getting these awards, just be very careful to make sure you actually fit the criteria. And then similarly, Indigenous ancestry is by self-declaration, and the University of Saskatchewan has their own process of reviewing that information as well at the time of your medical school application. But for us, you just declare that you are, and the University of Saskatchewan will assess as needed for the medical school application. And then lastly, for Ontario, the unique thing that is on this application is because there's 6 Ontario medical schools, and the award is waiving the fees for up to 3 medical schools, you need to specify on your application which of the 3 you want your waiver to be applied to. So if you only apply to 1 of the 6, you only get an award for 1. You only get 1 waived. So even if you only think about applying to 1 of the schools, you should probably still select 3 as a backup. It doesn't hurt to supply 3. We don't waste any resources or money if you only select, if you select up to 3. And even if you select 3, you can choose to not submit your applications to Ontario in the end. We still want you to use the award to apply to medical school, but let's say you only meet the criteria, the MCAT criteria for 1 of the 3 schools you selected, and you don't want to apply to the other 2, that's also fine, but you should choose 3 on your application. I think it's important, it's your choice, but you have up to 3. If you don't choose, then unfortunately, you don't benefit from that aspect of the award. You would only be able to get the $220 processing fee waived, but you wouldn't get the local application fees waived if you don't make that clear. So it can take a bit of time to make that decision. You should review the information that's on the Ontario University's application center website, which I'll be posting right after this. And you can review that information on the medical schools so that you can make an informed decision about which one you will apply to. So I'm just going to put it in the chat now. So there you can find information about all 6 Ontario medical schools and which 3 of those 6 that you'll choose on your application. Next slide. Perfect. So there are some pretty common questions. Some of them we've already gone through briefly. So if you have not done your income taxes, it's necessary for you to do your income taxes. There's no exceptions for this program. So please get that done. Get your parents to do them if you're below the age of 25, and get your spouse to do it if you're married. And because that's the only other way for us to assess your income at this time. And the sooner the better, especially because the turnaround time is sometimes 4 to 6 weeks through the Canada Revenue Agency. So if you are not able to access the documentation, similar to what we said earlier, then you need to email the AFMC who is processing the applications, and you clarify your situation, and that's at service@afmcstudentportal.ca. And then lastly, the other thing that comes up pretty commonly is that if you make a mistake on your application, but you've already submitted it, then you submit an error explanation letter to the AFMC, and that's going to be on the AFMC website. So I can post a link to that again, just so that you have it. And on that website is where you'd find the link to assess your eligibility for the program, but they also have an actual guide that you should download and look through. And at the end of that guide, there's that error explanation letter that you would need to submit sooner than later, because if they've already entered the application review process, then unfortunately there might not be enough time for them to process the change in your application. Okay, so those are the structured inquiries, things that we hear quite a bit, but I think now we can transition into more organic Q&A. I think that there's already been a start of having some of those things happen in the chat, which is amazing. So in the meantime, as we are open to receiving questions and engaging with you all, you should take down some of this information. So our website, www.priceofadream.com, is we have updates on the program there, and we're going to post this recorded webinar on our website within the next, I would say, 3 to 4 days. So if you want updates on the program, that's a place for you to go. You should also follow us on Instagram because we provide a lot of updates there. And then you should look into the actual AFMC website, and if you have questions, you should email them because they will be able to more specifically speak to your account and to your situation as it pertains to the application. Yes, exactly, Andrea. Sorry, I realized that if we're recording, people won't actually see what's in the chat. So Andrea was asking where the webinar will be posted after the webinar is completed, and we're going to put the recording on our website, www.priceofadream.com.
There were a few previous questions as well that I had already answered in the chat, so maybe I'll just reiterate so that they're in the recording as well. So someone had asked about whether it was possible to use that award to put into like the ABS under the awards section. And what I would say in terms of that is that you can definitely put it under the awards section of your application. However, do take in consideration the fact that it is a need-based award as opposed to a merit-based award. So if you're running out of space on your ABS, that kind of applies mostly for Ontario. But if you are running out of space, that might be something you might want to take into consideration of whether or not the need aspect is as impactful as maybe other scholarships that you've received or other entries that you might be able to put in. Andrea asked, if I apply to medical school in the next cycle, when should I apply for this award? So if you're applying for the next cycle, do you mean the upcoming cycle that is like for this year, or would that be for the one next year that you're referring to in 2023? Okay, so for 2023, if you're applying in 2023 and not in 2022, then you would be applying next year. So the application is usually open the same year as when you would be applying for medical school. So people who would be applying to this right now would be applying to medical school in the fall of 2022 for entry to the program in 2023. But if you're applying in 2023 to enter a program in 2024, then you would be applying for this fee application waiver program in 2023 as well, if that makes sense. So is the application for this fee assistance part of the application for medical school or a separate application? It is a separate application. And the application portal is on the AFMC website. Chantal, I don't know if you're able, perfect. So Chantal just put it in the chat. So that's where the application portal is. So it is separate from your medical school application. But if you are awarded, you will receive instructions as to how you can apply the waiver code to your application portal when you apply to medical school. If I get accepted by AFMC for this cycle, but I wasn't able to get into medical school, would I be able to apply for the fee waiver program again for the following cycle? So yes, you would be able to. And it's also the same case, I believe, for the MCAT. So there isn't a limit that we've set for how many times you can apply to it. However, keep in mind as well that depending on the amount of applications we get and who is applying, if you were to get the award this year, it does not necessarily mean that you would still get the award next year, because we worked based on a system of financial deficit. So if your financial deficit is higher this year but lower next year, or if there are just more applicants that have a higher deficit than you in the next application cycle, you could get it this year and not get it the next year, for example. Just like someone could not get it this year, but then get it the next year. It really just depends on the financial status. Someone had also asked higher up if the University of British Columbia Medical School program have an application fee waiver for prospective students. So they don't have one through us at the time. However, one thing that we have noticed through reaching out to universities across Canada is that a lot of medical schools seem to be slowly implementing some kind of initiative to support low SES students, whether it's through opening a specific stream or giving some sort of financial support. So something I still encourage you to do, if the university you're applying to was not mentioned in this presentation, I do look thoroughly through the website of the universities and the faculties you're looking at, because they may have implemented new changes for this upcoming cycles, and sometimes they don't update necessarily their website until like later July or August. So even if you're not seeing something right now, there might be something that appears later throughout the summer.
Yeah, that's a great point, Claudine. And I would also add that the more that you reach out to schools and express that this is a need that you have, the more inclined that they are to establish these types of programs. So it's not only helpful for us as we're building these programs and hoping to make them more accessible across the country, but if you end up applying more than once, hopefully it means that you get access to these programs or to these benefits if they encourage the schools to recognize that there is a demand for them. Has anyone assessed their eligibility yet? I know that the link is put in the chat. I was just curious to see if anyone has assessed it. You can maybe mention in the chat if you have. And if you're confused as to how to do that, maybe we can actually open up the website and show you how to do that.
Chantal, do you want to open it up or?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. Okay, so this is the AFMC website, and you're going to see that there are two programs listed. There's one for the MCAT fee assistance program, which is currently closed, but it's going to be opening up again in September for those of you who are interested. But the one that we're discussing today is the medical school application fee waiver program. So you need to scroll down to that section. I know initially it was a bit confusing, but it is there on the page, just at the bottom, where here there is a bit more of an explanation about the program, some of what we've talked about today already. But here are the three programs that are listed. So there's the Ontario program, the University of Alberta program, and then the University of Saskatchewan program. And if you click on this, then it's going to bring you to a portal that looks something like this. And there's this first page where you can fill out this information. So they will want to know where you are, like your province or territory of residence. And then the only part of your income taxes that you need for your eligibility check is line 150, which is, I think, total income. So if you have that information available for yourself, then you put that here. But then you also put your family size. And this is based on who you live with. So if you live with your parents, if you live with a partner, if you have children, you put that here. And then this is where you put information for your parents. You put that information there. Recognize that there's this asterisk here, meaning that this line is necessary. Like you have to complete this to do the eligibility check. This does not have one. But if you are under the age of 25, you're going to be expected to do this at some point. So just make sure it's better to input your parents' information here now instead of not putting it and then later on entering it and realizing you're not actually eligible for the program, because if you're not eligible, your application is not going to be reviewed. So just make sure it's better to kind of know up front that you aren't eligible instead of spending the time applying and recognizing that you aren't. It could be a bit heartbreaking. So that's why we recommend you put that information there. But if you're not under the age of 25, then you don't have to put that information here, and you can just proceed by responding to the final questions. Just note that the email you put here is the email that your account with AFMC is going to be associated with. So just be wise about which email you choose. Sometimes it can be helpful to make this email the same email that you'll use when you apply to medical school, just so that there's no confusion. But just be aware of that. So you put that information in, and then you'll be able to submit, and it'll tell you if you are eligible. I mean, we can do a test. So I put Ontario. If I put 14,000, so my family size was 4 or 5 people. I'm 25, so I wouldn't have to put this information. If I put my name and I put my email, already the one that I listed, so it's fine. Then this information would be processed pretty much immediately. So the fact that you've like proceeded to this next check means that like you are eligible. So if you weren't eligible, it wouldn't let you have proceeded to the next page. So I'll show you. My family was bawling at $1 million. And it was just me, all that $1 million for myself. Then it tells you you're not eligible. So then you won't be able to proceed to the second page like we just did with the other income that's listed. Any questions about that?
I want to know how you got $1 million.
I was just thinking that. Like, I speak it into existence. Okay. Is anyone maybe hesitant about applying to the program? Like, are there things that any worries you have? Like, this is a safe space, and if needed, like, we won't include this part in the webinar recording. So if you have any questions that you think might be a bit taboo to ask, then this is the time to ask them. Or questions about medical school applications too, since we're here and we've both been through that experience. Good question, Fatima. It could be either. So yeah, you could submit for either 2020 or 2021. So if you either haven't done your 2021 income taxes, or you just prefer, you can make a choice of which one that you use. I mean, it's based on financial need. So I think they don't look down on you if you haven't, or you're not penalized if you use 2020 instead of 2021. But because it's based on financial need, let's say, for example, you worked during 2021, but you're not working now, and you weren't working in 2020, then 2020 is a better reflection of your financial state now than 2021 would be, because your income tax or your total income in 2021 would have been higher than 2020. So it's important to choose which one most accurately reflects your financial state now, because we recognize things can change from year to year, and you want to make sure that if you're accessing the application, of course, that you actually need access to this program, and that's going to be best reflected by thinking about how closely does your income tax statements or your total income in one of those years reflect how you're doing now. So yeah, if you've managed to make $1 million in 2021, you should probably tell us. But if that was a one-off, I'm kidding. If it's a one-off, don't apply to this program. But in general, like if there was a bit of a spike because you needed to work, then you should choose the one that's accurate for you now.
Something I also want to add in terms of the notices of assessment, keep in mind that they will also be used for your eligibility in terms of residency for Alberta and Saskatchewan. So if you are applying to one of these two provinces / universities, just make sure that the notice of assessment that you're submitting matches your real application status when you're actually applying to medical school as well. Because let's say you were, for example, a resident of Alberta for the year of 2020, so you're technically eligible to apply for Alberta for 2020, but for 2021, you're not an Alberta resident anymore. You might be eligible for the fee waiver with your 2020 notice of assessment, but then when you go and submit your application at the University of Alberta, they might not consider you as an Alberta resident because they're taking into consideration your current residency status. So just make sure that all the documents that you're using match between what you're submitting for the fee waiver program and also what you're submitting for the medical school application. But yeah, there's about 12 minutes left. If you guys, again, have any questions about medical school as well or medical school applications, again, Chantal is at U of T and I'm at U Ottawa in the French stream. So we're happy to take questions about medical school in general as well. And that won't be included in the recording on the website as well, just to reiterate.
Yeah, and in the meantime, if you'd like to provide us with some feedback on how the session went, if there was something that you felt like we didn't cover or you might have missed, then you can also mention that there and it'll help us format the other sessions because there's 2 more webinars and that'll allow for us to support you if you come back to the webinar, but also to other potential attendees so that we are able to benefit you as much as possible.